Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 16th update on the tropics. We do have still two systems to talk about today rather than three because Fred has made landfall, so we will no longer be talking about that system. You can see Fred here moving ashore on the Florida Panhandle and generally continuing off to the north and eventually off to the northeast here. And hopefully this system does not do too much in the way of impacts. You still do need to be watching for tornadoes and flash flooding in the inland regions now as it comes to the north. And we still have Grace here to deal with. It is now entering the Western Caribbean, and we have Tropical Storm Henri here that has just formed off to the southeast of Bermuda. We're going to first talk about Grace here. In a rather complicated system this evening. We have a lot going on here. This is organizing, and it is becoming a lot better organized than it was over the past couple of days. We still have a rather broad system here. It's not very well organized, but it is definitely on its way to becoming a better organized system. The convection over the past day or so has actually consolidated to this mass here. I'll draw that a little better. This mass here that is over and to the south of the island of Hispaniola, and unfortunately this has passed very close to Haiti, and it's not passed over Haiti, but it is definitely there, and you can see a lot of rain and thunderstorm activity is over Haiti. This is very bad considering the earthquake that just happened. But the mid-level circulation and the lower-level circulation, according to recon data earlier this morning, passed safely to the south of the peninsula that is associated with the Dominican Republic, and now it will likely pass to the south and maybe have a brush with the Tiburon Peninsula of Haiti here. So it's going to be a very close call for the system if it does miss the Tiburon Peninsula. We do have recon, I think, scheduled for tonight, so we'll find out whether or not it did actually landfall upon the Tiburon Peninsula here. But it's still rather hard to find the center of circulation here. The best thing to do really is to look at the mid-level circulation and kind of find where most of the convection is going to congregate, as the mid-level circulation provides the most lift for the convection, and essentially the lower level convergence that the lower level circulation provides allows for the mid-level circulation to continue to provide that lift and not fall apart. So you can see this mid-level circulation here to the south of Haiti and moving off to the west, and this is becoming a little better aligned as the lower level circulation, even though it's broad, is somewhere in here. It is still a wave axis. You still do have a lot to deal with in terms of organizing, but it is becoming better organized. It will likely consolidate under this new convective mass here. As you can tell, the outflow is beginning to expand out of this convection, indicating that this convection is rather powerful and rather healthy this evening. And so, it is also entering a generally more favorable environment for lower level organization, because this region of the Western Caribbean, as it passes through the strait that goes between Cuba and Haiti, I can't recall the name right now, but as it passes through this region, there's generally more background spin in this area, and it's going to be passing right through that. So it will likely be able to organize its lower levels during this time, and will likely be able to begin strengthening as it approaches the Western Caribbean. This is kind of bad news for the areas downstream of the system. It did miss a lot of land, and unfortunately that means that the system will not feel the effects of land interaction as long as it would have had it gone over Hispaniola. It's very unfortunate for Haiti too, because it did pass rather close. So this is really not a great situation for the future forecast for the system. If we look at water vapor imagery here, you can see that the upper level outflow is beginning to expand out of the system here. These feathery clouds jetting off to the north and northwest and expanding generally out of the system this evening, indicating that the system is in still a pretty healthy environment. There is the trough that is developing off to the north and west of the system. You can see that here. The anticyclone that was shearing Fred is still now on the other side of the anticyclone. It comes Grace, and then you have the northwesterly flow turning into the or the northwestward flow turning into northeastward flow here as it comes out of Grace, which would likely enhance the trough just a little bit, but the trough overall would be a little more spaced away from Grace due to the upper level outflow pushing against that trough. And you can kind of see that visualized here on the GFS model. If we go back to what is currently time, or what is the current look of Grace, you can see that the GFS has actually kind of misrepresented the convection here. Convection in the outflow is a lot more potent than what is currently shown on the GFS. This is the 12Z forecast, and this is 7 p.m., so we're about an hour or two off from that time frame, and you can see that the GFS doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of outflow coming out of the system. So this is on the lower end of what it currently is. And so, but as this advances off to the west, you can see that it pulses some outflow out and pushes against the trough here. But a stronger system would do that sooner, and that's what we're seeing right now. And so you can see that the trough gets thinned out as this moves off to the west. This is not a very powerful trough at this point, and by the time it reaches the Yucatan Peninsula, the trough is essentially out of the picture here. You still have it off to the north and east, but at that point it's actually helping ventilate the system rather than hurt the system. And so, unfortunately, that means that the environment will only improve as it moves further to the west, and the environment that we were kind of expecting in the Gulf has unfortunately become increasingly likely here. And if we go forward into the Gulf here, this is about 3 days out here, you can see that there's not really a whole lot in the way of shear at this point. You still have pretty much an anticyclone going around the system, and the trough is way back here, so there's not really a whole lot that's going to happen with the shear once the system gets into the Gulf, and the National Hurricane Center seems to recognize this, now forecasting a hurricane over the Gulf in the next 4 days. We still do have a lot of time for potential changes in intensity and track, but it is beginning to narrow down here where exactly this is going to make landfall. This is a pretty straightforward track. If we go to the GFS model 500 millibar, you can see our mid-level ridge here that is centered currently just off to the south and east of the Carolinas here. You can see Fred here. You can see Grace to the south of Hispaniola, and you can see Henri here. The GFS has not been handling Henri very well. We'll talk about the implications that Henri has upon Grace's track in a minute. But as we advance forward, you can see this ridge begins to strengthen here. There's a little trough that we're going to be talking about in a second here, but this ridge really strengthens and pushes Grace off to the west and does not allow it to gain much latitude. But as this comes forward, you can see this trough that comes in and actually helps flatten out this ridge some, and the ridge actually weakens a little bit, but that also flattens out the flow, so it doesn't really allow for the flow to allow Grace to gain any latitude here. So as a result, the flow generally just comes out of the west and doesn't really allow for a whole lot of latitude gain at this point because the ridge gets flattened out due to the trough that is approaching out of the west. And we have to see how strong Henri is because the trough is on the negative tilt side of the ridge. And so this trough is the ridge is going to be pushed by this trough. But Henri, on the other hand, here it is, if it is stronger, it would be able to keep this ridge rather strong here. Kind of the whole pump the ridge thing that happens, and that was what happened with Jose and Irma as Irma came across the northern Caribbean. But we don't know if that's going to be the case yet. There's still a lot to figure out with Henri, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But still, the system is unlikely to gain much in the way of latitude. According to the National Hurricane Center here, you can see that the farthest north end of the 5-day track here is just to the south of the Texas-Mexico border. And of course, this can change and probably will change either north or south at this point. So if you're on the Texas coast, the southern half of the Texas coast here, essentially from Corpus Christi, the Matagorda Bay southward here, you do need to be watching this as well. You do need to be maybe watching this as it does come to the west here. And you have several days to prepare. You have 4 days to really prepare, but use that time wisely. And for Mexico, you do definitely need to be preparing as the system comes off to the west. This may be stronger than forecast here. A lot of models currently are starting to trend up rather fast here in terms of intensity. If you've seen the H-Wharf run running around Twitter, that is the upper echelon of what the system is currently expected to do. I would take that run with a grain of salt, as it currently forecasts a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 150 miles an hour, and that is definitely the upper end of what could happen. So please be careful when seeing that and spreading that information, because it is not entirely true, and H-Wharf has not done a great job of handling Grace. So please do be knowledgeable and look at things from every perspective rather than just one model run. So if we go back out and zoom back out, you can see Henri here off to the southeast of Bermuda. The system is still rather disorganized. It's not amazing, this system, and it hasn't really organized much over the past 24 hours. If we go to the visible loop here, you can see what we're talking about with a lower level circulation that kind of has just periodically bursting convection off generally down shear of the lower level circulation. You can see Bermuda here in the proximity of the system to Bermuda, but due to the small size, this is nothing more than just a breezy day for Bermuda at this point. But the good thing about that is that you can see it on radar. I don't have that currently pulled up, but generally what the system looks like, it does not currently have a well-defined inner core, which would allow for the system to maintain its strength. It is running into a couple of problems here that are currently hindering the system's intensity and ability to strengthen. It is currently dealing with a lot of northerly shear, not too much northerly shear, but is enough to decouple the mid-level circulation from the lower level circulation due to the fact that the system is not very well stacked and not very deep. So it would not be able to fight that shear as well. You can see the upper level outflow beginning to expand out of this thunderstorm activity, but that is above the layer that is actually being sheared. You can see these clouds off to the north, and you can see the clouds being wisped back to the south here, back to the southeast, and that is the general mid-level shear vector, and that is in response to the mid-level ridge that, again, if we zoom out, you can see very clearly this mid-level ridge here that is pushing the air generally off to the southeast, and you can actually see even more northerly flow coming out of a trough that is developing well to the north of Henri and currently pushing just a little bit of flow here, but this should begin to gradually enhance. And so the system is kind of running out of time here to really organize, and it really does, if it wants to do anything, it does need to organize probably tonight and have a well-organized inner core of sorts. And the good thing for the system, though, is that it is rather small. If we go back to the visible loop, this is not very far from Bermuda, and yet it's sunny in Bermuda today, and that indicates how small this system is. And smaller systems generally tend to strengthen and weaken rather quickly, so it could organize rather quickly. It doesn't have as much air to move around as Grace does, so this could organize in short order here. It did. I can see actually at the end of this image that the overshooting top kind of dissipates here, and you're seeing a flattening out of the convective presence of the system. So it does definitely need to continue to fire this convection, and that is uncertain at this point. But that being said, it does not mean that it is impossible for the system to strengthen, and it is not impossible for the storm to not reach greater strength than what is currently forecast. However, it is going to be difficult as shear will continue to increase, and you can see that on the upper level flow here on the GFS model. You can see that it is currently, this is actually 2 days out, but you can see that the shear continues to enhance. If we continue, this is where the system is generally going to be, so you just want to watch this area here as we go forward, and you can see that the northerly flow greatly enhances over the system, and if the system is not able to maintain or become stronger, then it will likely die over this area and will likely not become very powerful, because the shear will only increase. And if the shear increases over this area and the system doesn't get out of this area, then it will likely be destroyed. But a stronger system would feel the mid-level ridge that we were talking about with Grace, and this mid-level ridge is generally pushing air out of the north, and if the system becomes deeper, it'll feel that flow and actually move out of the north and move generally off to the southwest for longer. And you definitely want to keep an eye on this if you're on the southeast coast, due to what could be probably the worst case scenario as this system becoming a hurricane and feeling the ridge all the way down and making its way southwestward. So definitely do be watching this if you are on the southeast coast. For now, just be watching for rip currents and potential rough seas over the next couple of days. But if the system manages to maintain, then it will probably be able to strengthen continually here. Again, if you've seen the H-Wharf run running around Twitter, that brings us to a very powerful hurricane. Be cautious and be wary of the other solutions that do not bring this to a very powerful hurricane. You can see that the GFS does not really keep a well-organized mid-level circulation here, and actually it dies due to the shear that we discussed, and because it stays in a general vicinity of the enhancing upper-level trough that is off to the northeast of the system, it dies on the GFS model. But the GFS has also not really handled this too well, so I would take the GFS run with a little less seriousness and actually, watch the system as it develops off to the southeast of Bermuda. That's all I got for now. Let's go back to the Atlantic wide loop. We still do have a long season ahead of us. This is just the beginning of the active period of the season, and we do have still two systems that are currently definitely worth talking about. And we're going to look at one last thing with Henri here. You can see that there are tropical storm watches up for Bermuda, as the system could be close to the island for several days. If we go back to the true color loop of the overall Atlantic, you can see our monsoon trough that extends into Africa with waves coming off of it. You see a wave here, you see a wave here. We have a lot to go. We have a long way to go, and we definitely will need to be talking about the tropics for a while here. So stay vigilant, stay wary, and stay safe. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.